Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today, a retired educator and now international award-winning author, is an optimist whose Christian faith guides her to believe in the goodness in all God's creatures. She rescues domestic and wild, orphaned, injured, or abandoned animals. Hogan's Hope is a story of success against the odds, and she shares his journey and the message that hope can be found in the selfless and understanding hearts of loving people. She lives in Connecticut with her husband, Jim, their rescued deaf pup, Elsie, and yellow Labrador Gabriel in the rustic, puppy-friendly home Jim built off the dirt road on their 5-acre piece of heaven. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Connie Bombaci.
Good morning. Thank you, Julia, for having me this morning. I'm honored to be with you.
We're excited to have you. And you know, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Confidence. Lack of confidence. I can remember as a little girl being told by my fourth grade teacher, Connie, you can't read. And I thought, as I grew older, if I can't read well, how can I ever write? And I would always get my mother, who was a phenomenal writer, to proofread my things that I needed to turn in. Well, off to college I went, and I was taking English 101, the required course, and the professor decided to read several of our short essays, and mine was one of them. And at first I was quite proud that he selected mine to read. I thought maybe I can write. And he's reading it, and at the end he slams it down. And he says, this is what not to do when you write. This is horrendous. Don't ever, and went on how horrific my essay was. Of course, he didn't name me, thank goodness, but I wanted to crawl under my desk. And I just didn't have the confidence. Well, the years went on, and I became an educator, and I made sure that I was in a field that it was short writing, not long writing, so that I didn't have to do that. And my mother came to live with us, and she said, Connie, you need to write Hogan's story. And I went, Ma, I'm not a writer. She said, Connie, you need to write Hogan's story. He changed too many people's lives. Well, I began to think about it and thought, well, if my mother believes that I can write, maybe I should think about it. And I said, Ma, what do you think? And she said, Connie, just sit down and write. Well, I didn't sit down and write. I still hesitated, and I put little sentences together here and there, but my mother passed. And I said, what can I do to honor my mother? Well, I'll keep my promise and write Hogan's story. And I called it Hogan's Hope because Hogan taught me how to hope. And I sat down and I dedicated 20 minutes a day. If I could go more, I would go more. But I did not move from my computer for that 20 minutes. And I was in my late 60s when I was doing that. So I really wrote Hogan's Hope to tell Hogan's story and share that inspiration with others, but also to honor my mother and to keep my promise.
Well, that's lovely and a fitting end to that terrible professor. I can't imagine a professor using those tactics with people who are learning to write. That horrifies me.
He was something else. I went to meet with him one time, and he was just as cruel in person. So my confidence went down the tubes.
It's such a shame that we have teachers who make it through the teaching ranks into those positions. That really horrifies me because I was a teacher.
Well, now that you say that, he actually helped teach me how not to be as a teacher.
Well, at least something good came out of his behavior.
Something good can always come out of something, everything, right?
Yes. And you're certainly a dog lover like I am. We have 2 labs and they're like our children, or so our children tell me.
My children tease me and say, Ma, we'd like to come back as one of your pups.
Exactly.
Or how come they can get away with that and we couldn't?
Yes. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about Hogan's story, because he was certainly the inspiration for this book.
He was back in 1992. Our daughter was at the University of Rhode Island, and she rescued this 8-week-old little black lab mix pup. And she thought for sure, being a student, she could take care of this pup. Well, she found out in short term that she could not. So India was her name, came home to be our family pup. Well, as she grew, the energy level just grew with her, and she became extremely vivacious. And I said to my hubby, Jim, I think we need to get a second dog for her. And he went, oh, no. I'm not a dog person. One is plenty. We're good to go. And I continued to try to convince him to get a second dog. Well, we had a wonderful woman who would come in to help with the heavy cleaning once a month. And she became a very good friend of ours. And one day when we came home from work, she was still there. And she looked at us and she said, you need to get a second dog for India. And Jim quickly looked at me and said, wait a minute. I said nothing. So he was convinced, okay, we'll get a second dog, but it has to be the same age, 18 months, same size, about 55 pounds, short-haired, male, and neutered. I think Jim thought that I would not find a second dog that met those qualifications. I phoned all the rescue centers, the Connecticut Humane Society, didn't find a pup that met all of that. Well, I decided to call the Connecticut Humane Society back. And in 1992, 93, they had a telephone listing. And down the bottom of the list of dogs that they had for adoption was 18-month-old, male, neutered, Dalmatian. Wow. Deaf. I didn't even hear the word deaf. I got all excited and I called them. And I said, may I bring our black lab up to meet him to be sure that they got along? Jim actually became very excited and met me up there that very day. India and he got along famously, instantly. And they said, well, we have another person who is interested in this dog. So we need to see all of the references and go through the motions, and we'll call you tomorrow. That was the longest 24 hours of our lives. But during that time, Jim and I looked at each other and said, how are we going to talk with this dog? Because we knew communication was key to developing a good relationship. Being educators, we knew that talking with our students and understanding our students was paramount. Well, we had an aha moment at the same time. American Sign Language. It just made sense. It's already invented. Many people use it. So that's what we decided. Not knowing any except the sign for I love you, we said, well, we'll be learning right along with them. The next day I'm at work and I get a telephone call. Well, Mrs. Bombaci, come get your pup. You've been approved to adopt him. Well, the end of the day couldn't come fast enough, and I always stayed late at work. Well, not that day. I left right on time, got in the car. I had prepared the car to bring a pup home just in case they called. And up to the Connecticut Humane Society I went, called Jim, said, I'm bringing him home. And Jim went out and got a pocket-sized handbook of American Sign Language. And it was sitting on the counter waiting for me when I brought Hogan home. And Hogan was not named yet. We decided we wanted to get to know him first before we named him. And in the home he came. Julia, Hogan, you have to understand, had never been inside a home. He had been outside the first 18 months of his life in the Northeast, and that winter of his first puppyhood was a horrific Northeaster winter. And Dalmatians are not all-weather dogs, but he was kept outside, not sheltered in any way. So when he came in our home, he was very timid, and we just let him sniff and get used to the home. And I decided just to let he and India move around as they wanted. And I picked up the book and I went, okay, having trained dogs before, the first thing you teach them is sit. And so I started with that. Well, he learned sit, but I thought, he needs to know my hands are doing the talking. So I decided I'm going to teach him cookie, which is the letter C in the palm of the hand for cookie. I'd sign it, give him a cookie, sign it, give him a cookie. And as soon as he learned that cookie meant something yummy, my hands were telling him something yummy, we were off and running. And he learned those two signs in less than 24 hours. We were off and running. And as he grew, he learned over 70 signs in American Sign Language. We used over 100 with him, but I only listed the ones that I definitely knew he responded to or obeyed physically. And that's how Hogan came to live with us and be with us. And people became enamored with that. And I went to a Dalmatian club meeting just to see what it was all about and maybe become a member and learn more about the breed. Well, we were challenged. And show us that he obeys your hands. Show us. Prove it. And I did what he knew. And the president of the club said, he has selective hearing. That dog hears. Again, it put that doubt in my mind. So I decided to take him to Tufts University Small Animal Hospital to have his hearing tested, just to be sure. And at that time, we also had adopted another deaf pup, and we named her Georgia, and we took her with us. Hogan's hearing was flatlined. Flat, nothing, absolutely nothing. So he was very deaf. But they had never worked or seen a dog trained to American Sign Language. And Professor Nicholas Dodman found out about Hogan and became quite enamored. And they got to know each other. And Hogan went on Oprah Winfrey show with him. And Hogan's fame just traveled worldwide and brought hope to deaf dogs. And I could go on and on about his story, but that's it in a nutshell. And up until his last days, Hogan continued to bring hope to many people. The university close by, because he was in his later years, I didn't travel with him anymore. The class came to us, the American Sign Language class came to us so they could see an animal that understood what they were learning. And they were so thrilled that they could use this new knowledge to talk with an animal. And when Dateline came to see us and we went to a local elementary school, there was a deaf boy named Joey who had never been able to communicate with an animal before. It's going to bring tears to my eyes even now. Signed to Hogan and Georgia. And the whole Dateline crew just broke down in tears. And we let Joey have the pups for the day as he moved about the school, because he just signed to them and loved on them. And Julia, you know, the most beautiful part of this was that Joey went through our school system, and I was at the high school when Joey came through. And Joey was on the football team. And the football coach, gave them signs that they could communicate. But we went to the home games with the dogs. And when Joey ran off the field, he would go to knee, take his helmet off, sign to the dogs, and the dogs remembered him. And kisses were exchanged, and they oftentimes knocked him over. And it was a beautiful sight, and people just enjoyed it completely.
Connie, that's just about the most poignant story I've ever heard. That's bringing tears to my eyes. That's just an incredible story. I had no idea that you could teach dogs sign language. I know that hunters in the fields use signals for the dogs that the dogs know. They don't have to talk to the dogs from across the field, but that's just an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Well, Hogan's story holds so much hope and inspiration for what we can achieve. I believe from having Hogan that anything is possible when we hold hope in our hearts. Anything is possible.
And the extent that our animals can understand. I know that animals are supposed to be able to understand like 200 words, and they're just so much smarter and understand so much more, especially human emotions, that we just really don't give them credit for. So that's an incredible thing that you did, teaching the dog sign language.
Well, he taught us so much. And it's said that a righteous man cares for the needs of his animals, and that the animals can teach us if we just listen. And there's also another saying that I kind of adapted from the blind to the deaf. There are none so deaf than those that refuse to listen.
That's very true. So true. Well, once you finally wrote this manuscript to honor your mother, how did you proceed with it? Did you search for an agent, decide to choose a hybrid, a small press, or self-publish?
I guess you would call it a hybrid, because I knew that I didn't believe that I would have a publisher that would want my manuscript. So I just decided to publish it on my own and seek someone who could help me with the formatting and maybe the design of the cover, but with my say-so. I wanted to have full control over how it looked, and that if they decided, I didn't give them editing power, actually, of the book, only the formatting, because I wanted a dear friend of mine edit it for me, and she did a beautiful job. And then I had another friend kind of proofread it for last time, because I've read it hundreds of times, but I didn't trust myself to catch all the things in it. So another friend proofread it for me. And then I put the final seal of approval on it. But my first draft was what I call my Christian edition. And the publisher, or the house that was formatting it for me, came back and said, you need to take the scripture out of it. Now, the scripture was not in the actual manuscript. It enhanced it by being between sections or at the beginning of a new chapter. I wanted it to enhance the story, not, as someone said, invade the story. It actually spread itself out over it this way. It was the umbrella. And they convinced me, okay, no one will buy it, they said. And I was convinced when they said schools will not be able to purchase it. Well, that was the nail that convinced me to take the scripture out of it. So I did. But it kept calling me. And I put the scripture back in the manuscript. And I went back to this house to help me format it again. And they said, why would you want two books with the same title? And it actually has the same title, but different subtitles. And I said, I want to do this. I am paying you. It is my choice. This is what I want to do. And they said, well, it isn't going to sell. Well, it sold one-on-one with the secular manuscript. It sold. And in some cases, depending on where I was, it outsold the secular manuscript. So I have two editions of Hogan's Hope. One is a deaf hero's inspirational quest for love and acceptance. That's the secular edition. A deaf dog, a Christian's faith, a courageous journey is the Christian edition. So I have two out there.
Well, I know your faith is extremely important to you, and sometimes we try to meet the standards of the secular world, but our faith usually wins out. So I'm glad you did that, Connie.
Just real quickly, another interesting piece about both manuscripts was that both manuscripts received the Silver Benjamin Franklin Award, which is a fairly prestigious award. Both received that award in one year and then the following year.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the passage you've brought to share today, and then read from it so we can hear your tone and voice in the book.
Yes, it's another connection with a human being, that an animal can connect with the emotions of a human being. Hogan became not only a good canine citizen, but a certified therapy dog. He passed all the tests. And quite interestingly, he passed the test without the person testing the dogs knowing that he was deaf. And it was afterwards that she found out he's deaf. And she went, I wonder if this is okay. Well, there was no place in there that said that he couldn't be. So he became a therapy dog. Later on, this organization wrote in there, deaf dogs may not. And then later on again, when they found out deaf dogs are doing a great job, took it out. And Hogan was a phenomenal therapy dog. And every Sunday morning, we would go to this wonderful nursing home that was not far away. And he would just bring such joy to either the what we call the residents, some call patients, or families. Sometimes we did therapy work with the families that were visiting their relatives or friends that were there. And on one particular Sunday, when we were signing in, we always found out about who was new, who was discharged, or who wasn't doing so well, who was doing great. And the nurse said, well, we have this new resident, and he's way down the right wing on the very last room on the right, and he is a grumpy old soul. He does not want visitors. Well, that's all we needed to hear, was that somebody didn't want a visitor, because we believed that everyone deserves to have a friend. Everyone deserves to have a smile or a warm greeting. So in the home we went, turning right, going down this long corridor, making a right-hand turn into this gentleman's room. And we just stood in the doorway, knowing we weren't very welcomed yet. And what we saw was a long, slim, elderly man lying in bed, face unshaven, hair all a mess, staring out the window. He didn't see us standing there, and he sighed, and he turned his face towards us, and we saw a tear running down his right cheek. We didn't say the word, we just stood there. And we kind of nodded, and we turned and we left. Well, I determined right then and there Hogan was going to be coming back with me each week, because I usually rotated the dogs to take turns going in. But I wanted this gentleman to see Hogan every week. So for several weeks, we just did the exact same thing. We went down that right corridor, made a right-hand turn into his doorway, stood there. I started to nod. Then one week I said, "Have a nice day." Well, the next week after my saying, "Have a nice day," the nurse informed us he's sitting on the edge of his bed. We rushed down the right corridor, made that right turn into the doorway, and we stood there. And there he was, his hair still unshaven, hair still a mess, in his pajamas. But I said, "Would you like a visitor?" And he nodded. So we went in, and Hogan put his chin on the bed right next to the man's left hand. And the gentleman raised his trembling hand and put it on Hogan's head. And Hogan just moved his head closer to the man's leg so that he was right next to the man's body. And the man didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. And we stood there for a few moments until one Sunday morning, the nurse said, "You better hold up going to the gentleman's room, because he wanted to shave this morning." So we made our rounds and then went to the gentleman's room, and he was sitting in the chair in the corner of his room. And I said from the doorway, "Would you like a visitor?" And he said aloud, "I would like that." So we went into his room and we started to chat. So we went back. Our purpose was determined. We knew our purpose was to help this man become alive again. And so week after week, we went into this gentleman's room. And Julia, we learned about this man and how brilliant he was, and how he was this articulate scholar who was recognized with many awards in the world of media. His family had simply abandoned him and warehoused him. Hogan understood. He completely understood. And the months went by, and we developed a lasting, forever friendship. Well, my pup kept his promise. And each visit proved wonderful until one unforgettable Sunday morning. The nurse from his wing met us at the entrance before we had the chance to check in. "He's waiting for you," she voiced, clenching her hands. I was puzzled by her expression, but Hogan knew. Hogan never pulled on his leash, but he now yanked hard at its end. I attempted to correct him gently by pulling him toward me. He wanted nothing to do with obeying my request and yanked again. I signed to him, "Okay, boy, go," and dropped his lead. He took off down the long corridor and rounded the nurse's station. He continued to sprint as the nurse and I attempted to keep up. His gentleman was in bed again, still dressed in his night clothes, with disheveled hair and unshaven face, exactly like our first visit. Hogan refused to let him just lie there. Without hesitation, for the very first time, one paw at a time, he climbed into the bed and stretched himself along the length of his dear friend's body. I am sure that Hogan felt the warmth of the long, thin body and nestled closer. The man's right arm lifted and rested on the pup as he turned his face to see him. Hogan gently moved upward and put his head on his friend's chest so they could gaze into each other's deep, loving eyes. A tear streamed down the man's right cheek as he took a long breath, his last breath. I waited for you, Hogan. This impressive friend passed peacefully with his loving pup by his side. He wasn't forsaken. He knew that he was loved. The nurse who was with me sank into the chair in tears. "Oh, Hogan, you made a difference. Thank you. Thank you so much. He waited until you got here." Most of the staff gathered in the doorway and were speechless at the image of Hogan with his gentleman. They were stunned at how my intuitive dog knew that his cherished friend needed him before even entering the wing. No one made the slightest effort to move Hogan from his place, and he was permitted to remain with his beloved companion. Hogan had become a magnificent icon for everyone and a welcome ray of sunshine as he reached out from his isolated place of abandonment to share himself with others. Hogan's hope was for love, peace, and serenity for his gentleman, and for no one to ever be abandoned.
Oh, my goodness. That is a powerful message. I just read something the other day that said that when we pass away, our dogs need to see our bodies, that they understand death, and they need to know that we don't abandon them.
Very true. When my mama passed, she was here in my home, and they had a little pup, Heidi, and we didn't make Heidi leave my mother's side after she passed either. And my mom passed, and of course, after a couple hours, her body was removed. And my mother originally lived in Pennsylvania, and we went down there for a memorial service. And when we entered the home, I didn't think about it. We put Heidi down, and Heidi went screeching through the home, trying to find my mother. So they know. Yeah. They know. And Hogan knew. Mm-hmm. Hogan knew.
Well, we've had quite a session here today, Connie. You have brought me to tears, and we haven't talked much about your writing process, but it has been a lovely, lovely visit with you between two dog lovers. I know there's so many of us out here, and I think as our dogs age, that's our greatest fear is losing those dogs, and they've just meant so much to us. So I want to ask you our final question that we ask all of our authors. And our last interview question is always, our writers over 50 are quite unique. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
Believe in hope. You can do it. You can. Just sit down and write and bring others into your process, because they can be invaluable treasures that can help. You never know where you're going to get the gift of help and where that hope will just blossom into more inspired thoughts, and to trust your heart. It will happen. Just hope. With hope, as Christopher Reeve says, anything is possible.
You have been quite inspiring to all of us today, and I'm sure that you bring hope wherever you go in your ministries and with these animals. So I just want to say I appreciate you and all that you're doing in the world to bring that kind of hope to all of us who need it. So thank you, Connie, and thank you for being on our broadcast today, because now we can count you among our authors over 50.
Thank you, Julia. And it is, like I said before, I am so honored to now be your friend and to share in this ministry that you have, reaching out to people and giving them hope that they can do it.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend, and check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing, and remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.